This is the novel Sing in the Dark, The Legend of Gaughmesh. Chapter 1, Elizabeth. Elizabeth knew that I had returned from Europe and invited me to her house. I've been looking for you. She had sent me a cutout of a Basquiat painting while I was overseas. The painting was of a large skull with multicolors and block teeth. The skull was at a profile. People said that I looked like Basquiat, and I took their statements as a compliment. Then I began to read about his life and found mine light in comparison. My life was school, hanging out on campus, and chatting with art students. When I returned to campus, there was nothing left in the music department for me. I decided to be more like Basquiat by leaving the music department and searching for real art. For Christmas break, I received a letter of expulsion. My mother did not worry. She simply asked me what I planned to do. I told her that the English department would be a better choice than music, where I had exhausted those resources. Back on campus, the English studies took too much time away from my music, so I stopped attending classes, all except for two, poetry and a writing workshop. I had a dream about poetry class. My teacher was dressed in an overcoat and led me to a forklift. He spoke with arms wide spread. You cannot see the beauty of this scene, but I will show you. Just wait. The ground was split into a section of light and dark. The dark was an airplane runway, and the light opened to a log cabin. Inside the cabin were shelves with glass bottles neatly aligned. My teacher pointed to the bottles. The sun shone brightly through a window, and I opened my mouth to speak. He turned to me with the expression of a madman, a mirror image of my face, so I did not speak. I have always trusted my dreams as good omens. I remained in the writing workshop because of the teacher. The professor was rugged, woodsy aspects that I had never possessed. I liked to observe him. We had meetings in his office, and enlarged pictures of men and women captured my attention. Who took these pictures? I did. Where were they taken? New York. My path had been revealed. I was to go to New York. There was no reason to be in the school. I wanted to free my writing of academia and replenish it with life. I wanted hands to quake when they held the paper with my printed ideas. I wanted the words to capture the reader and take him into my world. For me, writing was an aid to escapism, a way to fall into the mind and leave the confusion of reality for a while. It is impossible to say how many of these experiences or stories have passed through my mind in the short time that I've been alive. I compared my existence with those of others and tried to track my fate, as some call it, a race against death to reach the highest point possible. I like to discuss fate with Zolan. I was on my way to Zolan's when I ran into Elizabeth. That day, I skipped my writing class for the day and the rest of the semester. I also stopped attending poetry class and went into a completely different existence. This existence outside of the walls of the campus sought more walls, guidelines to living. Elizabeth walked along a road behind the university that lay between the greens of a golf course. How was school? Her voice was nasal and aristocratic voice like I imagined those of Germans in the 18th century to have been. School is fine. I'm doing much better now that I don't attend. I never noticed it, but my voice was amazingly white. My voice always surprised me, especially when it reverberated in my chest. I lit a cigarette. Oh, you smoke now? Yes, I do. Something I picked up in France. Tell me about France. I told her in a quick synopsis that I started drinking, slept with beautiful women of all shapes and sizes, and was eager to find more debauchery and drug experimentation, something that I had not considered until my journey enlightened me on subjects. She was a woman 24 years old. We met when she was 21. We walked and she laughed at the usual jokes that went along with the French adventures. Are you hungry? I have a bagel in my bag. Thank you. I reached in my backpack and gave her a raisin bagel wrapped in a paper towel. I stole it from the cafeteria. Do you have any money? No. What are you doing for food? I've been eating when I could, scavenging food from friends and also stealing from the cafeteria. This was the beginning of a complete living by one's wits, an experience that progressed from days to months. Come to my house and I will fix you dinner. I got your letter. It was very nice to hear from a friend. I was surrounded by foreigners. Elizabeth blushed and we walked on. She wanted me to tell her about the girls that I had slept with. I told her the story of each girl and she listened intently. Elizabeth and I were closer than I realized. She was attentive to my every need. Here, sit on the couch. I'll make you some coffee. A year ago, I stayed at her house for a few days before leaving for France. The first night, I stayed in her bed, and after that night, she was so disturbed by my presence that she asked me to sleep downstairs in the basement with her roommate. Her roommate was an architecture student and extremely horny. He listened to Chet Baker in order to procure a bit of the jazz lover boy's charm. Baker, while singing a standard, could reinterpret the lyrics, making them more personalized and touching. To me, there had been nothing sexual about sleeping next to her. She was my soul's sister. As we sat on the couch, she sat very close and affectionately placed her arm on my leg. I returned the affection by stroking her hair, but with precaution. We had coffee, and I walked to Zolan's. Zolan lived with 3 students from school. Elizabeth called them the rich boys and obviously considered them very stupid. One was a composer, the other a physics major, and Dan and Zolan were art students. My level of perversion had peaked in France, a good orientation for their house, which smelled and looked like a brothel. They had pornographic videos, porn magazines, and pornographic minds. Our favorite pastime was watching pornos and talking about girls that we had or wanted to have. They built a bar that was stocked with drinks. 50 cents per shot, $1 per mixed drink. Everyone who drank was billed. By this method, they were able to restock the bar. The physicist had a father in Bangkok and a brother in Berklee School of Music. His brother played trombone, jazz trombone. He played tenor saxophone. The house on the hill gladly accepted me as one of their comrades. The physicist enjoyed listening to me play his horn. We talked about compact discs and visions, speculations on the direction that jazz would take. One night, while Zolan and I were discussing the universe, the value of art, women's tendencies toward controlling men, etc., 2 girls rushed into the house, Andy and Corolla. These were very special girls. It was a well-known fact that they did not seduce students. They had moved on to men. The 2 of them served as hostesses for a local nightclub. Andy and Corolla worked on art projects together. Everyone considered them one person. They ran to the house bar, and Zolan jumped behind the divide to take orders. Andy ordered for everyone. I'll have a shot of whiskey, and Corolla will too. Oh, I will. Corolla posed every question as an answer. For example, you wouldn't like to kiss me, would you? The girls used sex as payment for everything that they wanted. Corolla liked to tease me. My hormones raged quite regularly. That was one of the specifications to inhabit the house on the hill. Instead of rent money, I became a connection for the importation of women. I had phone numbers and methods of persuasion. Most of all, I had amusing stories. Corolla led me to the couch with a whiskey and Coke in her hand, and the question petered from her thin lips. So, have you been thinking of me? Yes, Corolla, I have. You want me, don't you? Yes, Corolla, I do. Can you help me finish this? She lifted the drink to my lips and poured it as I tilted my head. Zolan and I had been watching pornos and turned them off when the girls arrived. Andy walked to the television and turned it on. I want to see a dirty movie. You do? Zolan pressed the play button on the remote control and resumed the video. What are they doing? Corolla fixed her gaze on the television and asked no more questions. Let's go upstairs. I nudged her sleeve and she turned. Not now, I'm watching a movie. But we can make a movie upstairs. I'll get the video camera. Corolla laughed. Andy was back at the bar fetching another drink. She brought me one too. Here you go. Drink up. I lit a cigarette and took my drink. Watching the video with studied attention, Andy sat next to Zolan. He caressed the upper part of her shirt, making it wrinkle in a circular pattern. Andy continued drinking as if nothing were happening. Are you ready to go upstairs now? My cigarette was finished. Let me have some of that first. Andy kissed Zolan lightly. I placed the drink on the table and put my cigarette out. Without warning, I flipped Corolla onto her back and fell upon her. I held her arms above her head with one hand, joining her fragile wrist. With my free hand, I felt the length of her upper body stopping at the torso. On the return of my free hand to her wrist, I placed my mouth on hers. She thrust her pelvis into my crotch and broke the kiss with a smile and a sigh. I sat up and caught her in my arms, prying her from the couch. I picked her up and carried her up 2 flights of stairs to the room where I was sleeping. Where are you taking me? I didn't say a word. What are you doing? The room was dark. I threw her onto the 2 mattresses without a frame. She lay there in shock and anticipation. I closed the door and climbed onto the mattress like a cat. On top of her, I whispered into her ear, "We're upstairs." "What are we gonna do?" "What do you want to do?" "I'm not gonna have sex with you," she teased. "Who said that I wanted to have sex with you?" She moved slowly beneath me and we stopped talking for a while. "Andy will be wondering where I went." "No, she won't. She's downstairs with Zolan." "I'm not going to sleep with you." "I don't want to. Let's just play a while." "I'm not going to sleep with you." I moved from her and dropped to the side, propping my head on my hand. "What makes you think that I wanted to sleep with you?" Corolla looked confused. She was in awe that I stopped trying to seduce her. For some reason, she felt that all men were in her control and should welcome the opportunity to be her plaything. I stood, took my shirt off, and descended the stairs. Andy and Zolan were still embracing, his hands firmly groping her breast. Andy looked up. "Where's Corolla?" "She's upstairs. You girls can go now." I lit a cigarette and focused on the television, drinking again. Andy squirmed out of the embrace and called for Corolla. We could hear her hollow steps descending. She walked heavily in her motorcycle boots. She drove a BMW motorcycle and Andy had a Yamaha. Tonight, Andy would drive them home in a Jeep. The girls pretended that they were broke, but the material evidence told a different story. "You girls should go home now." I timed the statement with Corolla's descent from the last stair. "Oh, come on, lover boy." She laced her arms around my neck. I stared more intensely at the television and took a drag from the cigarette. An evil energy was surging from my body, invading the room. A darkness came over the room. My speech was altered. I removed Corolla's arm and switched my glare from the television to Andy. "Why don't we switch partners? I want Andy now. I like her breasts." Zolan became solemn. He was trying to find a role in the new mood. Corolla jumped the back of the couch and landed next to me. I pushed her to the side. "So, what will it be?" The fun was over. The air was smoky from the cigarette, and the couple on the television were reaching climax. The man took his penis in hand and defaced the woman with semen. She squinted, and a close-up of her licking his sperm from her fingers was shown. Andy was sober. "I think we should leave." "Isn't that a novel idea?" Corolla pouted. The girls left. Zolan was back at the bar pouring another drink. I sat where I was and thought deeply about what I had done. The girls deserved it. They acted like whores and had no intention of having sex. I felt evil. It was as if I had called forth a side that I did not know existed. Good thing those bitches are gone. Should I rewind the tape? I attended many parties after leaving school. I would play my saxophone at some parties. At others, I would finish the keg. It had been a month since I had talked to Elizabeth. Her friends called her Bitsy. I tried to call her Elizabeth when we spoke. We met again at a party on Bleecker Street. Before the party began, I was at a friend's house about a block away. The people at the pre-mixer were boys that I had been in France with. Another guest was a student artist. She had done a portrait of me. The portrait was a large cartoon-like blue figure on a yellow background. Meeting at Mike's on the weekend was a regular occurrence. At Mike's, we drank beer and smoked foreign cigarettes on his snow-covered outdoor patio. The patio was on the second floor. Mike was tall with blonde hair. Alexa was a sturdy girl with short brown hair. Troy was a short, stubby character who fancied the beat poets and the French symbolist. Troy admired Baudelaire because of his pro-substance abuse. In Fleur du Mal, Baudelaire pledges himself to the devil, inviting anyone who has experienced the darkness that he speaks of to empathize with him and all others to be damned to hell. Troy walked in madness. He tried to stretch the limits of waking time. He followed the rules very precisely and praised Dylan in the same breath as he lauded Burroughs. Sometimes I bartered porn that I had taken from the Hill for one of his prized French or Hollandaise magazines. That night, Troy was reciting an epic poem that he had written. While reciting, he tilted and ran in circles, shouted at the top of his lungs, tapped shoulders, and breathed heavily. A semicircle was formed, making a stage for the hairy wild man. To some degree, I felt that Troy and I were very close. In this same sense, I felt close to all men and women, androgyny, a trait presented to the surrealist by Gala. We were trying to create our own writer's circle. Troy was the drug tester, Mike the satirist, Alexa the visual artist, I was the dreamer. Troy and Mike screamed in unison at the end of the recitation of his epic poem. Mike stayed around Troy too much for his own good. Troy depended on a number of vices to prompt his creative spirit. Troy smoked Camel Wides. Mike, who did not smoke, started smoking Lucky Strike non-filtered. Troy collected pornography. Mike, under a pseudonym, had Playboy sent to his home. With the use of a false name, he would not have to pay for the magazine. He had also scammed Columbia Records to acquire compact discs. Troy smoked pot and knew the local dealers by name, their phone numbers memorized. Mike smoked more and more pot with Troy, the amount increasing every week. They drank beer together, and Troy ranted about newly written poems. Meanwhile, Mike saw himself involved in a forceful metamorphosis that he did not want to fall victim to. After this party and others, several months later, Mike was admitted to a mental hospital. Troy was already insane. I had never been close to anyone at school, never revealed my truest feelings about anything. This kept me floating in an ether of lost identity. I had no one to prove to me that my life was real. I had no connections to those people considered the norm by society. Perhaps those people didn't exist anymore. There is no norm. People thought on many planes, each separate in many different levels. I had a vague sense of self, therefore I lived in between dream and reality. Pot and beer helped fuse the two worlds. That night we smoked pot and drank beer. Heading to the party at 11 p.m. As we approached, the sound of house music blasted into the chilly air. A strobe light in an upstairs window blinked shamelessly. A group lounged on couches. Boy, girl, boy, girl. The host was among those lounging. He lifted a large glass funnel toward me, his elegant welcome. I went through the kitchen to the basement. The stairs were wooden and creaked under the weight of our bodies. The group that I arrived with filed behind me as I made the necessary rounds. In the basement, I walked through a dense human fog of voices and smoke. I bummed the smoke from one of the many smokers and held it high above my head. I took a glass from an acquaintance and had the plastic cup filled to overcapacity. I placed the glass in Mike's hand, and he stumbled away, following his own inner voice. Our unspoken treaty was that we arrived together and split up once we reached the keg. Troy stayed on the porch with Alexa, and Mike stopped in the kitchen. With all of the haphazard movement in the basement, I found myself pushed into a vacant corner. I observed the crowd, wondering where the fun had escaped to. Elizabeth was in the crowd. She singled me out and slid into my corner. We acknowledged one another with nods, clandestine nods, knowing glances. Our quick encounter stated that we had revealed our true selves. The mask lifted for seconds, enough to signify that later we would talk intimately. Elizabeth stood with her back to me, talking to her roommate. The band mounted, clang, clang, cover. Cover bands draw too much attention. People enjoy having the norm shove their way, a song that tells them how it is supposed to be. In this way, thinking is optional. They have been told that the music is good, so they do not have to make decisions about the music. Simply listen and drink makes for a good, effortless time. Rilke's advice to poets is that the artist assure himself that a certain medium of self-expression is his absolute passion. If the art is not their scourge and panacea, then the result is a cover band, an uninspired machine, a human jukebox. Bored with the band, I creaked up the stairs to the kitchen. There I found another corner. A Puerto Rican beauty entered the kitchen. In the cage of drunkenness, I stood and pulled her with me into a corridor separating the kitchen from the TV lounge. Who are you? Jessica, I'm Micah. Nice meeting you. I kissed her, a hearty, inebriated smack on the mouth. Her body molded into mine, assuming my shape with her impressionable breast and thighs. Goodbye, she whispered, turned, and left. Caught like a stray, I followed her to the front porch. I tried to grab her hand, but with strides more precise than I was capable of duplicating. Jessica, halfway into the yard, threw me a kiss. Elizabeth was seated on a lawn chair witnessing the event with an air of superiority. The sight of a man chasing a woman can be an amusing and empowering to a woman observer. When I noticed her, she beckoned me. I sat next to her. Do you want to take a walk? Yes. I was surprised that she wanted to promenade. Her usual response was no. I wanted to walk away from one-night stands, from appearances, from the complacent. What am I doing here? What do you mean? Why am I wasted? Why am I chasing women? Why did I smoke pot? Why can't I do well at this school? Will I ever stop thinking about myself? That's a lot of whys. I just want to dream to sleep. Whenever I smoked marijuana, I had a dream shell about my body. There was nothing that I thought too unreal to attempt. My most heathen self emerged, and thesis of control made me reckless. The mode that I was in bordered on suicidal. My actions were irrational, closer to instinct, animal, a trait that was becoming quite appealing. Even my scent was piquant. From not showering, Elizabeth understood my dilemma. Let's go to my house. The party taxi was leaving, and we convinced a stumbling lot of students to give us a ride. Her house had 2 flights of stairs that led to her glass doorway. She held my arm as we climbed to her castle. Once inside, she led me to her bedroom. The situation confused me so that I rushed to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. The bathroom was a familiar place. No matter how different my surroundings, the bathroom was always neutral ground. Bathtub, shower curtain, toilet, wash basin, mirror. Bathrooms had mirrors. For Cocteau, mirrors were a means to death. Death traveled via mirrors in Cocteau's Orpheus, the explanation being the passage of time was captured in the reflection. I touched my face, feeling eyes, mouth, nose, ears, hair. I pulled at my hair, the pain of reality. Convinced that I was still myself, I moved on to the next reality check, Elizabeth. She was in the next room waiting for me. I had become all of the vices that I had been against. She had listened to the stories with admiration, enticed by the stories of women in general wandering. The more that I confided in her, the more she wanted, and when she was satisfied with wordplay, unrest settled in her body. She wanted the words to translate to actions, actions that she would observe in the privacy of her bedroom, a test of the delicious tales. I walked into the room with a futon on the floor. Elizabeth was in bed, covered with a blue comforter. I took off my pants. My shadow was cast across the room, a quarter on the floor, 3/4 on the wall, in a 90-degree angle. We did not speak. She was wearing cotton panties. A CD player displayed a red operation light. Sade crooned, and Elizabeth sang in out-of-tune whispers. She touched me with a trust that came from years of friendship. There was no difference between us being naked or clothed. We kissed. We did not speak. After touching, I fell asleep with my head on her stomach. The secret marriage. I slept well and dreamt of her. She did not sleep. We exchanged positions that night. She was the adventurer, and I was stable within myself. She slept when I was not there. I only slept when she touched me. I worried about nothing. I waited 3 years for comfort. She waited 3 years to comfort me. Mechanicsburg to New York. Chapter 2. He had taken a break from everything but cigarettes. No more alcohol, no more marijuana, no more caffeine, no more aspirin, no more painkillers. He decided to take a hiatus from body-altering substances. His mind was becoming slowed down. The crazed insides, intestines flowing about in a haze that left the smoking joints and the incense in the wooden boats that floated on smaller tables. The tables reminded him of mushrooms. He would attempt to change his sleeping habits so that he could retire during the day in public places. People pointed at him and labeled him a narcoleptic to describe his unwakefulness. He would wait to be seated at all-night diners and sleep during the hours noon, to 4 p.m. At night, he would practice his instrument and write, watch television, and listen to music or smoke. Smoking was the only vice that he could not leave behind, partly because he had romanticized the idea. He would see pictures of men content with a cigarette in hand or mouth. Morton Feldman's portrait on the inside disc cover of his works being performed by the Kronos Quartet with Aki Takahashi. The disc, entitled Piano and String Quartet, displays a photograph of a calm, round head with glasses and a haberdasher hat, staring away from the observer at whatever happens to be to the left of them. The outside cover design is composed of a lattice pattern of pastel colors on a black background that seeps into the foreground. He also found the image of a jolly C.S. Lewis comforting. The smoke of his cigarette continues to travel past the binding of the book. His hands are resting on his leg in a shadow created by the lamp fixture hanging from the ceiling. The screw tape letters, Mere Christianity, Surprised by Joy. A quote from the fourth white crisp page: The devil, proud spirit, cannot endure to be mocked. Thomas More. He has never heard of Thomas More. He wonders why there are two L's in the word devil and why proud and sprite have E's tacked on the end of the words. There are also two periods instead of the conventional three that separate the words devil and sprite. On the next to last page of the collected sections of thought, he reads that Lewis enjoyed most sitting up until the small hours in someone's college rooms, talking nonsense, poetry, theology, metaphysics over beer, tea, and pipes, and was almost a lifelong bachelor. Ornette Coleman was a bachelor. He had been married to Jane Cortez and attempted to have surgeons perform an operation that would castrate him. The result of his inquiries only left him circumcised. The circumcision was a symbol of loyalty to music. His marriage to music was like nuns to God. The chords and personal theories involved in making his music became God, and the saxophones were rings. Ornette has a bag with all of the saxophones that he ever played. He wonders if Ornette will melt the saxophones into some sort of sculpture. Of course, the sculpture would be improvised. A mouthpiece here, a reed there, ligatures strewn about, and all of the engraved bells facing forward. Most saxophone bells, King, Con, Selmer, Jupiter, have pearl keys that could serve as eyes for the sculpture with many arms. The arms are the minuscule feelers that support the action of the keys removed from the current positions. The eyes could be removed to reveal a hollow body with Bunsen burner flames set about the massive sculpted body in a chain of silver tubes spitting bluish red flames which change clear air into staves of heat waves. The waves dance about, giving an immaculate movement to the metal form. Perhaps enough Bunsen torches could be lit to melt the figure in blue printed areas. These areas would be a catalyst of sound. The sounds are made when the metal collapses, a sculpture that is its own performance piece. Metal with multiple human characteristics that move as humans, giving the inanimate an immediate personification. Ornette felt that the risk of having a wife was the obligatory support that a creator feels that a creator must embrace. If the musician is married and left his wife in one location while he traveled throughout the world, she would file for divorce within months. The creator feels that he should be free to roam and find more sounds, words, images. It was true what Elizabeth said about New York and everyone wanting something. We had just arrived in Manhattan, somewhere in the West Village. No one knew where we were. The street signs read Christopher and Bleecker, and all of the well-dressed homosexuals crossed the streets with struts and flirting smiles. I wondered why I felt so safe and finally attributed this feeling to the feminine voices coming from men. Their voices were sweet and innocent, no talk about guns. Several conversations reminding possible lovers of chance meetings in nightclubs. They mentioned places that I did not know existed. So, I thought, now that I'm here, what to do? The bridge leading to the Holland Tunnel ate my stomach as we crossed. I fell into the neon that harbored the bay and searched for phone numbers. At this time, The friend to stay with was not available. The fact that he was not home had me scratching through buried files of displaced numbers. Could I possibly find the number of his girlfriend? After a less than prodigious attempt at the number, I came upon a friend's number from Dallas. She was like a nymphomaniac. She would parade as a student of NYU in order to meet men who could satisfy her. She was infamous for giving a boy from Howard University a disease that made his testicles swell to the size of grapefruit. I studied the number calmly and was convinced that she was the last resort. An impending feeling of commitment never entered my mind. There were so many lives to intrude upon. I wondered if my lifespan would allow me to fill all of the space left in my arms, legs, penis, chest, nipples, eyes, head, to consume the massive amount of social garbage that would lead to a gentle work of art. Of course, there would be hassles, but it was a hassle to write at 12:30 p.m., noon 30, and have the sharp awakeness of 3 cups of coffee near 3 o'clock a.m. I called a friend and asked if I could drop off luggage there. After a hearty consent, I smiled because she mentioned that her ex-boyfriend was meeting her that night. She goes rock climbing on Saturday at 1 p.m. Therefore, he could drop off his clothes at any time before 11 o'clock p.m. He checked with his ride and found this to be a feasible plan. However, 6 o'clock p.m. that night would be easier to do. Maybe the ex would be there when I arrived and I would be able to assign some mood to the atmosphere. The mood could be any number of colors, and he wanted to test her. If he could prove to be more promising than her boyfriend, then he could possibly become her roommate. He would have to wait until the moment of reason. This is the moment of time when all the possible scenarios to the situation have been figured. I have been calling a friend at Columbia University for months and was unable to reach him. This would be ample excuse for him to stay with her. He did not expect to pay rent in New York. I'd rather live in Europe. Stingy Lulu's Waitress, Chapter 3. The dream of a dungeon head makes the outward bound thoughts invert once more. The outward bound is no less than one spoken syllable that creates the communicable. In order to reduce the speech patterns to scent and visual, he would move constantly and not rest his senses. The confused patterns lost within chaos were slowly moved to the unconscious. The flowers within remained there in fields. Bountiful tufts of colors rose and fell into the waterfall bloodstreams. He realized that the stream would flow safely and round. Spherical imagination, the softly mellowed the flow of reality. There was no bridge between the real and the farce. The trick to a clueless strand of stasis was to become beyond the point of tired and drill silently into the wells created for the purpose of mind-boggling every day to the strong base of afterthought, no longer coerced by the unfeeling selfishness lying in a hapless abandonment of right and wrong. To become an insomniac by choice and stop trying to make sense of coins found on concrete or love songs of lyrical but mute birds. There is no reason to collect those sounds. They float in the perennial ether. He saw the lips of a woman who reminded him of another woman and dismissed the opportunity to speak with her because the birds had taught him an indispensable lesson. His goal would be to have a tryst with her. He would not set a time to meet her, but would opt not to say a word, just stare into her mouth and rejoin the now lost woman. He would make her presence an interpreted dream. They could say anything in his mind, and he could convince her to pay the same attention to his awkwardness. There was nothing comfortable about the stare, but it was calming. The look continued even in her absence. He smiled at the mesmerized countenance. Her face became a part of his natural cravings, such as food, nicotine, water, a thirst for carnal and mental stimulation. By augmenting the woman's lips from a real proportion to an immediate billboard enhanced illustration, he could refurbish a lost gesture by replacing it with another. He watched her movements as her slender arm wrapped in a cotton holster held fingers that pressed buttons on a screen that gauged the progress of the diner. A quick glance revealed that the screen was a table or grid that presented the names of all items inscribed on the menu. She handed him a menu after taking the order of members of the same abject party that he had arrived with. Their faces were as clocks. Their bodies were drifting slowly into retirement as their eyes convinced their bellies that they needed to be filled. The waitress stood with her back to his table and grazed the side with her bell-bottom mesh tight-fitting at the torso and flared at the bottom. On top of the cotton sleeves was a red vest which served as a bib for cigarette ash and coffee stains. It was 5 o'clock a.m. outside and noon in his head. Her presence awakened his drowsiness and the dream took over. His consciousness was affected by the anticipation of her recognition. He wondered if she was there every night, morning, and if the faux marble tabletops would ever tarnish and rot. There was a jukebox in the corner next to the stairwell that led to a non-smoking section. When he had arrived, he had lit a cigarette and strayed toward this section without acknowledging the sign posted blatantly on the face of the orange wall. In the restroom stall, he found matches with an emaciated, skinless face. The flesh was gone, and only a skeleton remained. The cheekbones were gaunt, much like his face and that of the woman who waited on him. He took care not to look directly into her eyes, which meant that he would be content to give her attention only when she was not in his presence. The voyeurism was close, like an imprisonment. In an REM state, the body does not wish to leave its present realm. The sleeper has no control on the outside world, and the eyes are closed, revealing the luminescent figures caught in the solstice of an ignorant being. Businessmen, artists, vagrants, babies all share this level of non-existence. Those who say that they do not dream are the luckiest. Theirs is a state of innocence. To awake, those non-dreamers are helpless, especially if their sleeping moments are capable of closing doors to everything in the apogee of their resting place. Lucid dreaming is cheating the mystery of a sound sleep. The nerves are still in some way responsible for the frescoes that belie the dome called a head. Her feet were sheathed in clogs. The feet were dangerous because they propelled her posture from one place to another. The clogs were constructed from leather and stapled with gold studs that ridiculed and resembled spurs. These slippers were the new boots for city cowgirls. The city assigned this woman an attitude reminiscent of the West. As a man sat at a bar stool with his head locked onto a lattice of elbow and forearm, she talked inaudibly into a telephone's receiver. At this time, he knew that she was aware of him. He knew that she had noticed him with the Marlboro in hand, periodically ashing into a metal shell ashtray. The slow pulse of her teetering foot on the counter exhibited her placid air, which set the tone of her voice. Her actions were fluid, and the phone cord swayed with the rhythm of her lips, the movement made by curtains blown by soft winds as the detailed trance that her lips wove about his eyelid. Her belly was slim, a muscular stomach that bounced in flutters. He spoke loud enough for her to hear his conversation and tried to explain a story similar to this one to his friend sitting at the opposite end of the marble table. The bottles behind the bar were aligned in a perfect order, with most of the spouts turned to the right. Along with the bottles was a sign with letters neatly printing the message that minors would not be served. Hopefully, he could make the present dream an unconscious experience. By extreme concentration before bed, he could finish all existing scenarios with the waitress in the comfort of his resting place. He remembered that Paul slept on the ground with a rock as his pillow on the Isle of Patmos, and that the birds brought him nurturing fruits and vegetables in between his writing sessions. She was a bird without feathers, and he was Paul, writing upon invisible tablets. As he left the diner, her stare became the domineering force field that caught him and reversed the subconscious reality which he had left in the diner. Now it was up to her to evaluate his attraction. She would have to assign him a place in the cast of the New York After Hours Society. She would wonder whether he would return or not. What type of clothing would he select for his next visit? Would he wear the soft black pants, or would he change his look? Would he arrive with the same crowd or return alone? If he returned alone, maybe he could speak to her and get somewhere. She delivered the check while he was smoking at a table that happened to be different from the first. She recognized the game, not to speak. Observation of lips rediscovered of fictitious secrets excavated from troglodytes of unfilled conclusions. A hollow corpse, only lips. Not really lips, but an image. Closer to a thought than an image. Dream overtaking the real. Oranges and reds, yellow and black, face without definition, a misguided phrase. The man sitting across the subway had ankles immersed in milk that left spotted stars. A woman, 2 seats and a space apart, sat next to the exit with a blanket tent overhead. She stretched her belly and revealed no marks, just an overfull belly. The white against the black was distinctive and wiped clear of blemish. No one would touch her. The facial expression was one that forced others away and let no emotion to be seen. Her look was not even one of pain. It was merely a drained look that fell upon the dim-lit train as a reminder that it was past 12 midnight and midway into the morning. When contemplating where morning begins, 3 a.m. is the midsection. Midnight is the starting point. 6 a.m. is the end period because many workers leave at that time in order to start the day. The train was a house in transit. Those who slept on the A train could travel uptown, and if the 1 or 9 were taken, then the ride would tunnel them to the end of the island on the west side. Of course, the subway map exhibits all of this on a neat grid that is difficult for any colorblind person to read. He had taken his finger and used it to trace the lines. The lines are fluid, but are jostled at a delta station, which appears to be the splitting of planaria. There is a poster on the A train bearing descriptions of diseases and numbers to call for fleeting cures. Traveling salesmen would boast tonics that were cure-alls, and the posters mimic the pitches that were used during these times of horse and covered wagon. Spaghetti Western and Ennio Morricone scores filled the subway with unkempt cowboys. They tamed their trains and carried their scents with them. The smells were all they had, but were the same as animals claiming already inhabited territory. Many smells passed through the doors and were released only to be captured by the plastic seats. The color yellow is one that expresses excitement and anger. People who drive yellow cars are showy people. Most fights between family members occur in the kitchen, and most kitchens and homes are yellow. Fights don't usually occur by swimming pools, although the tile can be similar to kitchen floors. Or is that the floor in restrooms? If a swimming pool was the same as a kitchen, then the island in the center would be like an open-air pool, or an enclosed one for that matter. The train could be transformed into a little village with the conductor as mayor. Stand clear of the doors. Next stop, 42nd Street, Times Square. About 4 of the squirming train lines met at 42nd Street. Several mayors meet at this stop and must check the signals for a non-biased controller in order to keep order. Chaos is not approved. The trains move in the same streams and do not change lines unless there is a problem. The problem is resolved and the trains return to their normal course. The time period allotted for the journey is placed on a schedule so that those people wishing to vacation on that line may do so without too much of a wait. In between the train rails are streams of water. As Hillary reads, he thinks of situations lost to forlorn destiny. He associates the characters and stories with real-life figures in his realm and takes more time to complete passages than others who have read the same material. He was reading a story about men and women, the usual, and thought of his girlfriend overseas. She had been good and horrible. Of late, he had been obsessing over her. His dreams were filled with the apparition of his Frenchie. Her skin was olive and her hair black. Her arms held no muscle because of their limpness during years of ballet and modern dance. The legs were staunch and her eyes were... He felt that he should marry this woman and that she should be willing to marry him. He was changing physically and mentally at every stop and decided while reading that this chase for the ideal was inane. In his most recent dream, Frenchie had come to him finally and he kissed her without a pause. The pause was a deciding factor. If he had hesitated, then this woman would have drifted into his arms, wondering if she should be there at all. Hillary was convinced that celibacy was the right path to take. He would not even allow himself to look at women in a sexual way. He was aware of the reverse action caught in this charm. He had been eyeing women in the East and West Village and everywhere in between. He was new to the city and found that women there flirted in a completely different way than in France. He would wait for eye contact in France. The women in New York chose their men. They would watch from afar and attack in the most clandestine, covert manner. One almost encounter was in Union Square in the park area. He crossed the mini plateau and stared at a woman with her dog. He watched her until the green light turned red and vice versa. After crossing the crosswalk, he was surprised to see the woman conveniently at his side. Another instance found Hillary walking near West 18th and 7th Avenue. 5th Avenue is the workplace of innumerable models, and he passed them with an unfaltering attitude and air to match their own. From 2 blocks away, West 16th, he spotted a woman wearing platforms that caused her to hover before claiming the next section of the sidewalk. She walked with amazing runway know-how and concluded each stride with a shoulder shrug to adjust her backpack. She saw that he was following her and stopped at a fruit stand to make his day a joyful chance meeting with an amazing figurine. Hillary caught the whole situation and crossed the street with the intent of meeting her. He bypassed the fruit stand, talked himself into returning, placed his sunglasses at an even level with his eyes, and returned to the stand. He looked to the vendor for support, but found the vendor as quixotic as he. This woman had transformed into a windmill spinning expensive perfume partout. He then continued to walk in the same direction as before, and by then had become a complete spectacle. He felt that everyone on the street was watching him to see if he would stop swallowing his ass and say something to her. Instead of speaking, Hillary stood in her path and waited for her to pass. She walked not 2 inches in front of him, but 1.5. He did not speak. She reminded him of his Frenchie. At the moment that he read, he evaluated all situations and concluded the following. He only looked at women resembling his Frenchie. He did not speak to women because he knew that his woman was safe in France, tucked away in a lover's alcove. The 2 choices above made him a truly obsessive individual who missed all sorts of yummy opportunities. This behavior would have to come to an end. The woman who walked into the causeway was the same age as Christ when he died, a befitting foreshadowing of a self-crucifixion that could be perceived after a slow period of future's time. The time belongs to that source that determines the existential. The possibilities that there are more women like this one are very possible. A redundant sentence inspired by repetitive action spawns the intensity involved in forgiving the original image. Everything attempted by one creature could easily follow a strand or cue that resembles caterpillar movements, the jointed sections that remind of the personal. A person is only allowed to follow an originated thought, a pivot point, or a hard swollen tongue. While the reggae played in the background, the foreground slowed to a sense that my soul had been locked in a room for days and not allowed to be awakened for the remainder of years. Colored film times are the same as those who think that you only call them in dire need. The need that is brought above the less stylized perfection, a continued grace, a faultless stroke of grand intentions. Here is a limited amount. The woman asked for money for a hotel for the night. Her hotel cost at least $20, and the man gave her the relaxed sum of $1.25 in quarters. This way, she could make 5 phone calls. She spoke French because of her origin and had lived somewhere near Frankfurt in Germany. As she spoke, he envisioned himself lying in between her legs on the couch. He wanted her to seduce him in front of his newfound friend and lead him to that couch. The couch was like a land that he would be pleased to explore. It was upholstered and had a cloth draped about the breadth of it so that the random bodies that crashed there would not leave their scent. The scent entrapped on that night could be that of mine or hers. She left and I slept there the night afterwards. I smelled of cologne and deodorant. I didn't take my shirt off for the second time that I stayed in the apartment. The door was covered in a light that came from a steel dome and 100-watt bulb. The light was off when the woman entered the apartment. She told us in French how she had moved to the city in search of a man who called her at length and begged her to come to the city and move in with him. She sold her car and moved from her position in Frankfurt to the city. I had fallen for her, not for the sake of her beauty, but because of her need for a place to stay. The long leather coat on her shoulders was as dark as the panic in her eyes. She had lived on an edge. The city was pushing her solidly back onto the unstable slab that she had encountered upon leaving Europe. Her lover was nowhere to be found. He had left his brother at the door of his apartment with a blank stare and no explanation. Vicariously, I would be able to override her lover's unkindness and carelessness in order to make some type of life for her. At that moment, I would have gladly married her and brought her into one of my treadmill beds. The bed seemed to float beneath me and never paused for enough resting moments to sustain a healthy response to a repose. During the day, I was concerned about where the bed would come from for that night. If only I were a snail. If only she were a snail.